the convener of this conference, the commander of the Sri Lankan Army, the Secretary of Defense, foreign delegates, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here to speak as an Indian, but as an Indian very sympathetic to the cause to which the present government of Sri Lanka is committed. When I was coming, there was in the Delhi airport, there was a poster of the Ministry of Environment in which it said, "Beware, the tiger is becoming extinct." Well, I said, I'm going to a country where it's already extinct. I must say that the victory of the government of Sri Lanka over the terrorist organization called the LTTE is a historic landmark in the history of the world, because it was a decisive victory. There have been terrorism in other parts of the world where compromises have been made. Yet governments after governments have committed themselves to what they call as zero tolerance for terrorism. But Sri Lanka ultimately made the sacrifice to bring it to an end. And as a consequence, we in India, I would say most Indians, if not all Indians, most Indians are pleased with this development, grateful to the government of Sri Lanka, because for us also, the LTT was a problem. One of our former prime ministers, in his young age, in his 40s, was assassinated by the LTT. And the LTT had carried on many illegal activities in India, such as drug peddling, gun running, and sometimes functioning as contract killers in the state of Tamil Nadu. So for us also, the end of LTT was a great turning point. India assisted in the war, and I think that India will continue to assist more and more in whatever way the government of Sri Lanka wants. This conference is in fact extraordinary. It's probably one of the best organized conferences I've ever attended in my life, and I've attended many. And to see such participation, it's extraordinary. I would like to concentrate on the question of reconciliation. But I would like to say that let not this victory over terrorism be diluted by the media circulation of wild accusations of genocide and gross human rights excesses. I would say that experience, and I've studied the cases of many countries. I've in fact written a book on how to deter terrorism. In the experience of many countries which fight internal insurgency, not external wars. Of course, wars between two countries are regulated by the Geneva Convention. But when you fight an insurgency within your country, then there is a lot of collateral damage that takes place. And that collateral damage includes innocent people being killed. That doesn't mean that the violation of the human rights that is implicit in innocent people being killed is a state-sponsored one. We face this in India every day, this criticism what is happening in Kashmir, or what's happening in Nagaland or Manipur. If you want to protect the integrity of our country and the insurgency is domestic and it intermingles with the local population, I think it is inevitable that you will see some civilian destruction or killings. Even in World War II, the city of Dresden in Germany was destroyed completely by Britain, even though it was not a place where there was a military concentration. But it was to break the morale of the German nation. The bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, where only civilians were killed, was again to bring the war to an end. And in the Nuremberg trials, it's very explicitly recognized where such collateral damage takes place that the Commission cannot take notice of. So I would like the world in general not to dilute this great victory which the government of Sri Lanka achieved, a victory which not only is for their own country, but which has implications for fighting terrorism in general. I am here to raise the questions of prerequisites or essential elements of reconciliation. The first essential component of reconciliation has to be necessarily that the Tamils of Sri Lanka must vocalize what they feel in their hearts and what they tell me in private, because I am also a Tamil. Of course, the pro-LTT Tamils don't recognize me as Tamil, but that doesn't matter. I don't recognize them as humans. But the fact of the matter is that Tamils after Tamils tell me that they now are happy that their children are not going to be forcibly recruited by the LTT, that they can go to school and colleges, that their money is, that their paycheck is not sliced by extortion, that there's no uncertainty. There are, of course, they are not fully satisfied. They want certain expressions. They want to feel that they will not be marginalized in society because there has been a portrayal, and partly mostly by the LTT spokesman and their apologists, that this is a war between Sinhalas and the Tamils, and the Tamils lost. So there is a concern on the question of marginalization. But nevertheless, they all acknowledge that it's a breath of fresh air that they're now breathing. And they want this to continue. They don't want this fighting to resume. The fighting itself came, the militancy itself came because there were agreements between the Tamil leaders and the Sinhali leaders, and these were not kept. Whatever reason, they were broken after they were signed. There is a background to all this, which we must recognize. When the British came to the island, as the British were prone to do wherever they went, they cultivated the minority and targeted the majority. They did that in India, they did that in many other countries. It was a very effective way to rule. The minorities were grateful, short-sightedly grateful, and the Tamils benefited by their collaboration with the British. And as a consequence, by 1948, when Sri Lanka got independence, the Tamils had a huge disproportionate share in the services, in universities and so on. Democracy in Sri Lanka led to the majority getting power, and since it was a unitary state, Sinhalese got almost 100% of the power. And they went about correcting this imbalance. In the process of correcting this imbalance, they went overboard. And this led to anxiety, and finally the Tamil leadership entered into negotiations. These negotiations ended up in failure because they signed the agreement and then it was gone back on. As a consequence, a new young breed of boys began portraying these leaders as softies, as Uncle Toms, as betrayers. And out of that came militancy. And finally, in India, when Mr. Jayawardena was the president here, Ms. Indira Gandhi was the prime minister, their chemistry was never very good. And she thought that this is an opportunity to take revenge. In fact, she had even alleged that Jayawardena was elected president because the CIA helped him. Well, of course, the Soviet Union helped her. That didn't matter. So, therefore, she launched on a program of training these militant forces. But the LTT wanted to be the sole representatives of Tamils. And they decimated everybody else. They decimated anyone who was not under their control, even if they're not hostile. There was a Harvard Law graduate here called Neelam Tiruchelvam, who used to plead with me whenever I used to go back to teach briefly at Harvard. He was a student at that time. It was a law school. He used to plead with me, don't be so harsh on the LTT. We have nothing else. But even he was killed by the LTT because he refused to become a member. Same with Amrita Lingam, who started the whole movement for Elam in the 70s. He too was killed. The mayor of the Yogeshwaran was a member of parliament. He was killed. His wife, who became a mayor, she was killed. In fact, the entire democratic leadership of the Tamils was destroyed by the LTT. And it is in that vacuum that this terrorism grew. It became it spread all over the world. I was talking to their arms procurer and financier, who is now in the custody of the Sri Lankan government. And he told me that weapons came freely from North Korea. Well, this is the first time I've heard this admission being made. But they got weapons, and they, of course, this is an ancient culture here, both Tamils and Sinhalese. They were able to make aeroplanes, they were able to make submarines. They were on the way to making a submarine. And if they had succeeded, as the Norwegians wanted, and thank God Rajapaksa didn't listen to them, they would have been a threat to all the nations in the neighborhood, and particularly India, where there is a Tamil population. So I'm saying that first and foremost of all, the essential has to be that the Tamils have to recognize and own up this victory as theirs. And the Sinhalese should also be able to co-opt them in this victory. I don't want this victory to be diluted by any other consideration. I oppose the resolution of the UNHCR India very vehemently, appeared on television denouncing the government. I know that the Prime Minister, left to himself, would not have supported this resolution. But our Prime Minister is in an extraordinary position where he is not the final authority in making decisions, and consequently he had to go along. The United States, for some other obscure reason, decided to pursue this resolution, although the United States internationally was the country which made LTT into a recognized terrorist force. First country outside India which banned the LTT was the United States. And the United States then went after other countries to do the same. They went after Canada, European Union, and LTT became one of the most banned terrorist organizations in the world thanks to the United States. But I don't know what happened. Sometimes the lapses do take place, and I hope the United States will reconsider not to go on this path, because this is something which is, there's no end to it if you once start this kind of resolutions. So I would say the first essential would be that this is something that the Tamil community must recognize. And I say this because I'm extraordinarily disappointed that those who were screaming the most about Sri Lankan army committing excesses, genocide, killing innocent people, shooting them, when the elections came and the president, Mr. Mahinda Rajapaksa, stood again, the Tamils couldn't find anyone else but the commander-in-chief of the Sri Lankan army to be their candidate to fight against the atrocities committed on the civilians by President Rajapaksa. This twisted logic nobody understood. How can the president be held responsible when the executor was the commander of the Sri Lankan army, Mr. Fonseca, and then the Tamils, particularly the pro-LTT Tamils. The TNA was always a spokesman for the LTT. I don't know whether they still are, but they proposed him as a candidate. That was the hour when the Tamils could have participated and joined with the Sinhalese majority and owned up this victory as a victory for peace, for democracy. But they missed it. And that is something that is an essential where all of us, including those in India and particularly those in India, must exercise their influence to see that the Tamils identify themselves with those steps taken by the government of Sri Lanka to bring normalcy to the state. I'm happy to see that today the Indian government has finally written a letter to Mr. Karunanidhi, the DMK chief, who is wanting to hold another conference for the creation of Elam. First, they verbally told him, if you mention Elam, that will be a criminal offense under our law. So he gave a public statement that he will not mention Elam as a separate country. But now they have sent a letter today that if you hold a conference and Elam name comes anywhere, then we'll ban the conference. So I think finally India is now again returning to the path of normalcy on the question of dealing with this question. But I would like the Tamil population to exhort the Tamil population through this platform that please identify yourself with this move towards normalcy, reconciliation, by owning up that whatever excesses, whatever has happened has happened. Whatever allegations have been made are what happened 3 years ago. It is nobody's case that anything has happened since then. Our own government tells me before I leave for this conference that the work that the Sri Lankan government has done in rehabilitation is commendable. They have met most of the targets that they said that they would meet. So these are some of the things that needs to be highlighted, and the Tamil population should participate in that. The second essential, I think, is it's time that this idiom that this is an ethnic war be given up. There's nothing ethnic about it. You'll be surprised, many foreign delegates should be surprised to learn that both the Sinhalese and the Tamils claim that they came from India. Only that the Tamils have more vigorous spokesmen, whereas the Sinhalese have Lalu Yadav and other people there who are not interested in the problem. The Sinhalese claim they came from Orissa, Bengal, and Bihar. And the leaders of those states are not bothered about the fate of Sinhalese at all. It's only the Tamils who had been fed this separatist ideology, which has now been exploded by the new genetic research through the use of DNA. Modern research, scientific genetic research now says that all Indians have the same DNA. The British, when the British were ruling in India, they produced textbooks to made out that we were two communities, one called Aryans and the other called Dravidians. And the Dravidians were ruling India, then the Aryans came from Europe, and through the Hindu Kush, they invaded India and took over and drove the Dravidians to the south. And Mr. Karunanidhi in Tamil Nadu bought this wholesale. In fact, he used to till recently celebrate Ravan Leela, because in North India we celebrate Ram's victory over Ravan, who was the king of Sri Lanka. But he was not a Sri Lankan. He actually was born on the borders of Delhi in a place now called Noida. And his wife was born in Meerut, Mandodari. And later on, his brother was here. He came and conquered Sri Lanka and became the king. The demon king, as it's called, the great Ramayana, which Mr. Karunanidhi turned upside down and started celebrating Mr. Ravan as the great hero of the Dravidians. There is no word called Aryan in entire scripture. There is a word called Arya, which means gentleman. But there is no word called Aryan. There is no record in any part of Indian scriptures or historical writings that some people came from outside and ruled. But somehow, perhaps divide and rule was the policy of the British. It has been part of our textbooks, which is now slowly being exercised now because of modern science, that there is no such division at all. We are one. And I know there is a research which has not yet been published, going to be published soon, which shows that Sinhalese and Tamils also have the same DNA. There's no ethnic difference between the Sinhalese and the Tamils, and that is what the Tamils and the Sinhalese both should recognize. Nor is there any religious difference in any fundamental sense. The difference between Buddhism and Hinduism is much smaller than between Shia and Sunnis and the Catholics and the Protestants. We Hindus recognize Buddha as our God, as a evolved soul, divine soul who reformed some of the bad practices in Hinduism. And therefore, that doesn't divide us. In fact, I am very pleased to see Sri Lankan leaders coming to India and going to temples. The Tirupati, the Sai Baba temple, the Guruvayurpan temple. So there is no religious difference of any significance. Even linguistic differences. Both languages enjoy common vocabulary through Sanskrit. Tamil has 40% Sanskrit words. The Sinhalese language probably has more. I don't know any Sinhalese at all, but when I listen to Sinhalese speak, I can at least understand the gist of what they're saying because of the Sanskrit words. So where is the difference? The difference is not cultural, the difference is not religious, the difference is not racial. It's not an ethnic difference. And if that is taught through schools and colleges and textbooks, then this divide will go. The Tamils are different. And by the way, let me tell you that after eating this Tamil food here, I've come to the conclusion that the Tamils of Sri Lanka didn't come from Tamil Nadu, but came from Kerala. So you may have to amend that. And the words they use, the accent they use is also very Malayali. So anyway, it doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is that we are all the same, and that has to be instilled in the younger generation, that we are one people. We have differences. In India, we have all kinds of differences. But when there is an attack on the nation, we have combined. Whenever there is a war, India has combined. Whenever there is a catastrophe like an assassination of a leader, we have become one. So we may have differences, may have disagreements, but ultimately when the country's future is at stake, we should be one. That's a second essential that has to be instilled into the population. There's no Aryan Dravidian, that's nonsensical. Dravida is a Sanskrit word, which means where the three, it's a sandhi of two, it's a fusion of two words, which essentially means where the three oceans meet. And that is southern India. And I told you the word Arya has no other meaning except that you are a gentleman or a person of culture. Now the other thing that we need to do is the third essential, and that is the question of minority and majority. And that can be rectified only by devolution. No doubt Tamils are minority. And if you divide Tamils into Tamils Muslims and Tamils Christians and Tamil Hindus, it becomes even bigger minority, even more sharply a minority. The Sinhalese population is 75%, like the Hindus are 83% in India. It's a dominant thing. And when you have a dominant majority, everything can't be decided by majority rule. It's a standard constitutional principle. There have to be safeguards. That is the only problem that today Sri Lanka has to address. As an observer, I say, as a well-wisher of Sri Lanka, I say. Yes, there was a disproportionate representation of the Tamils in 1948, but much water has flown down the rivers. And now is the time to recognize Tamils as a minority and to bring in constitutional changes which would then make it possible for the Tamils to meet some of their regional, local aspirations without disturbing the overall integrity of the island of Sri Lanka or the country of Sri Lanka. How is that to be done? That is the question. And I'll take 2 minutes just to conclude on that. We need, therefore, a constitutional change, not in the fundamental sense. Indian constitution is a unitary constitution, Sri Lankan constitution is a unitary constitution. There's no need for you to have, any one of us to have, because we are in the nation building process, a federal constitution like the United States, where the states are almost a law unto themselves. We need, therefore, safeguards to see that any time a state tries to break loose or doesn't perform according to national objectives, then there must be constitutional provisions by which it should be enforced. 13th plus amendment now is in great circulation. The 13th amendment itself was adopted by the parliament. Some changes are necessary. I had the opportunity yesterday of meeting your president, who said that if the parliamentary process can be speeded up by a cooperation from the Tamil community and the opposition, then it can be done quickly. And that's precisely what needs to be done. I would therefore, I have a print, I circulated to the organizers a copy of my written address, which is in much greater detail. But let me say, I point 8 points, and with that I will conclude. First is that no proposal for reconciliation should be and can be pushed from abroad. It has to be indigenously emerge. And of course, with due consultation with stakeholders, nobody has a veto, but Parliament is the ultimate authority. Second is that there was widespread acceptability of the concept of 13 plus amendment. We defied countries and final shape should be given to that as possible, because that's the only thing that is being used against Sri Lanka all over the world. There is a minority and the majority doesn't want to devolve power. Nobody goes into the substance of what kind of devolution. But I think get it out of the way. Some devolution should be done. And therefore, this is out of the debate. And once it's out of the debate, then we can proceed further with other aspects of nation building. So there should not be much delay. This is my opinion. Whether there will be delay or not, that only Sri Lankans will decide. But I am of the view that it will be much easier to fight the enemies of Sri Lanka unity if there is some devolution in the near future. Third is that, of course, the Sri Lankan constitution must remain unitary and the center should have power to dismiss the provinces when they don't act in accordance with the constitutional provisions. The provincial governments, in order to be acceptable to the minority, the head of the government there, called the chief minister, should have primary responsibility to maintain public order, which means control of the police, but the union in the constitution should be empowered to have a central police and army to be stationed in every state, and also the power to appoint national magistrates or nationally or the under the authority of the central government, having magistrates who can override the orders of the state magistrates. Sri Lanka, of course, would be a secular country, but its identity is clearly a Buddhist country, which I think no one can have any objections to. It is, after all, culturally a Buddhist country. But it should be, in political matters, a secular country. And finally, with the increasing proximity of Tamils and Sinhala communities, the recognition that we are the same, that is, they are the same, there's no difference religiously, ethnically, racially, linguistically, any difference, or even from the origins of coming to Sri Lanka, is there any difference between the Tamils and the Sinhalese? One people, I think there should be progressively this sharp polarization, geographical polarization of Tamil and Sinhala must slowly come to an end, and they all must be states in the sense that every state has a representation of Tamils and Sinhala. Not some areas exclusively Tamil and some areas exclusively Sinhala. These are some suggestions I make humbly, and this is for your consideration, but I as a friend would find it much easier, I as an Indian would find it much easier to meet criticism against Sri Lanka if there is some early devolution, so that we have that out of the way and we can proceed ahead.